Evelyn had walked for what felt like days. Her feet were sore, her clothes tattered, and her heart heavy with grief. She hadn't planned on being out in the mountains, but the world had changed too quickly, and now she was just trying to survive. The storm was coming and she had no shelter. There had been no way to know when it would strike. It always came like that, unpredictable, wild, and cold. Her little daughter Eliza was struggling to keep up, but Evelyn didn't have the energy to carry her. She could only hope they would find shelter before the storm took over. The world outside had been a strange mix of survival and hopelessness ever since the war with the Zera started. The Zera weren't human. They were alien creatures that had once appeared peaceful, but as soon as humanity began to unlock their technology, the Zera attacked. They destroyed cities, wiped out entire populations, and turned the world into a wasteland. Evelyn had lost everything in the attack. Her husband, Thomas, had been a scientist, working with others to try to understand the alien technology. It was his job to find a way to fight back, but he never came home the day the Zera attacked their village. She had no choice but to take her daughter and flee. She had no idea if there was anyone else left. As the storm began to pick up, Evelyn pushed forward, her mind focused on finding shelter. She noticed a small cabin in the distance nestled against the mountain. It looked abandoned at first, but then she saw the faint glow of a light from inside. Hope flared in her chest as she hurried toward it, calling for Eliza to follow. The wind howled, making it harder to hear her daughter's footsteps behind her. Evelyn didn't look back, too focused on the cabin. She had to get them inside before the storm turned dangerous. The storm could kill them if they weren't careful. The cabin door opened before Evelyn could even knock. Standing in the doorway was a tall man with a rugged face and a thick beard. His clothes were worn, but they looked sturdy, built for the harsh conditions of the mountains. His eyes were wary, but there was something kind in them, as if he had seen more of the world than he cared to remember. He looked at Evelyn for a moment, his expression unreadable, and then his gaze shifted to Eliza, who stood behind her, clutching her mother's hand. Evelyn took a deep breath, too tired to speak at first. She didn't want to beg, but she had no choice. "Please," she said, her voice shaking from the cold and exhaustion. "Can we stay the night?" "The storm? It's too dangerous out here." The man hesitated for a long moment. Evelyn thought he might turn them away, but then he stepped aside and motioned for them to come in. "You'd better get inside quickly," he said gruffly. "That storm's going to get worse." Evelyn nodded gratefully and stepped inside, holding Eliza close as the door shut behind them. The warmth of the cabin hit them immediately. The fire in the hearth crackled, casting a soft glow on the room. It was a simple place. Wooden floors, a few old pieces of furniture, and shelves filled with supplies. A few animal pelts were draped across chairs and the floor, giving the cabin a homely feel despite its roughness. Evelyn let out a long sigh, her body sagging with relief. She could hear Eliza breathing easier now, the girl's small body warming up beside her. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. They were safe from the storm, at least for the night. The man moved to the fireplace and stirred the fire. "You're lucky to find me here," he said, his voice deep and rough. "Most folks wouldn't come this far out. You should be careful where you go, especially in a storm like this." Evelyn glanced at him, noticing the scars on his hands and the weariness in his eyes. He looked like a man who had been through too much, just like her. "Thank you," she said softly. "We didn't have anywhere else to go. My name's Evelyn, and this is Eliza." The man nodded, still tending to the fire. "Callum," he said simply. "I don't usually get visitors. I don't have much to offer, but I can give you a warm fire and some food." Evelyn smiled faintly, too tired to say anything more. She watched Eliza curl up by the fire, her small body shrinking into the blankets. The girl looked exhausted but safe for the moment. Evelyn's thoughts wandered to her late husband, Thomas. He would have been the one to find a solution, to fix things. But now, she was alone, and the world outside was more dangerous than ever. She sat down near the fire and finally let herself relax, letting the warmth seep into her cold bones. She had no idea what would happen when the storm passed, but for now, she was grateful to be inside with Eliza. It felt like a small miracle. Callum didn't say much after that. He seemed content to let the silence fill the space between them. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but inside it was quiet and peaceful. Evelyn couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over her. It was strange. She didn't expect to find such quiet in a world that had been so loud with war, with loss. But this cabin, this man, felt like an oasis in the storm. After a while, Callum finally spoke again. "So what happened to you? How did you end up out here in the mountains?" Evelyn looked at him, feeling the weight of her story. She hadn't told anyone the whole truth since the attack, not even the other survivors she'd met along the way. But something about Callum made her want to share, to be understood. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her emotions. "My husband was part of a group that tried to fight back against the Zera," she said quietly. "He was studying their technology, trying to figure out how to turn it against them. But when the attack came, he didn't make it out. I didn't know where to go after that. I took Eliza and we've been moving ever since, but..." Her voice caught in her throat and she paused. She didn't want to cry in front of a stranger. "But I don't know if there's anyone left." Callum listened quietly, his face unreadable. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to comfort her. He simply let her speak. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Evelyn felt lighter after sharing her burden. When she was done, Callum didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, he nodded. "You're not the only one who's lost everything. I've been here for a long time trying to forget what happened." His voice was rough, but there was no bitterness in it, just acceptance. "We all have our stories." Evelyn nodded, grateful for his understanding. She had no idea what the future held, but for tonight at least, she and Eliza were safe. And maybe, just maybe, Callum was someone who understood. That thought, that tiny sliver of hope, was enough to make her believe that there might still be something worth fighting for in this broken world. The storm raged on outside, but inside the cabin, for the first time in a long while, Evelyn allowed herself to believe that they could survive. And tomorrow, maybe they would take the first step toward rebuilding what had been lost. The morning after the storm finally passed, the sun's pale light streamed through the cabin's small windows, casting soft shadows on the wooden floor. The air was crisp, a sharp contrast to the warmth inside. Evelyn slowly opened her eyes, feeling the weight of the last few days settle in. Eliza was still sleeping soundly beside her, wrapped in a thick blanket. The little girl's chest rose and fell gently, her face peaceful in the early morning light. Evelyn carefully stood up, not wanting to wake her daughter. She stretched her tired limbs and moved toward the fireplace, where the embers from last night's fire were still glowing faintly. The room felt different today. The storm had passed, and now the world outside seemed quiet and still, almost too quiet, as though the storm had swept away all the noise of the world. Callum was already up, his silhouette visible in the dim light. He stood near the door, looking out at the snow-covered landscape, his expression unreadable. He looked like a man who had been alone for a long time, someone who had seen enough of the world's cruelty to prefer the isolation of the mountains. Evelyn had no idea what had brought him here, but she suspected it was something dark, something he didn't want to talk about. "You're up early," she said, her voice soft but warm, breaking the silence. Callum turned and nodded. "The storm may have passed, but we should be careful. It could come back. And besides, it's a good day to get out of this cabin for a bit." His words were matter-of-fact, but there was something in his tone that made Evelyn feel a little more at ease. Despite his rough exterior, there was kindness in his voice. Evelyn smiled, though she didn't feel quite ready to leave the warmth of the cabin just yet. "I'll get Eliza up in a moment. She's still sleeping." "No rush," Callum said, his gaze drifting back to the snow-covered mountains. "We've got time. There's no need to rush out into the cold." The quiet words hung in the air as if they both understood that the world outside could be dangerous. The Zera hadn't just taken their homes and their loved ones. They had changed the world itself. The cities that once bustled with life were now silent ruins, overrun by the strange alien technology they had left behind. Some people had tried to fight back, like Evelyn's husband Thomas, but it had been a losing battle. The Zera had only grown stronger, and with each passing day, the hope of reclaiming the world seemed more distant. Evelyn moved to the small table in the corner of the room, where a simple breakfast of bread and dried meat was laid out. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get them through the day. She cut the bread into slices and handed one to Callum. "Thank you for letting us stay," she said, her voice sincere. "I don't know what we would have done if we hadn't found your cabin." Callum shrugged slightly, not one for long speeches or pleasantries. "It's no trouble. Like I said, I don't get visitors. It's been a while." Evelyn nodded, understanding more than he knew. She was grateful for the shelter, but she also knew that it wasn't just about survival anymore. After everything that had happened, she needed to feel like there was still something worth living for, something worth fighting for. And now with Callum, she wasn't sure what that would look like. But for the first time in a long time, she had a feeling that she wasn't entirely alone anymore. "Have you ever thought about leaving the mountains?" she asked softly, unsure if she was overstepping. Callum didn't answer right away. He took a bite of bread, his eyes focused on the ground. Then slowly he looked up. "I've thought about it, but I've never had a reason to go down. Not since—" He trailed off as though the words were too heavy to speak. Evelyn didn't press him, but she could see the pain in his eyes, the same kind of pain she felt every time she thought about Thomas. "I used to fight back," Callum said after a long pause, "with a group of others. We took the alien tech, used it to fight back. We thought we had a chance." His voice faltered as he spoke, but it wasn't enough. It was never enough. Evelyn wanted to say something comforting, but the words felt hollow. What could she say to a man who had lost everything, just like her? Instead, she reached out, placing a hand gently on his arm. "We all lose something, but that doesn't mean we stop fighting. It doesn't mean we stop living." Callum looked at her, his expression softer now, though still guarded. He nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right." They ate in silence for a while, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the soft wind outside. Eliza eventually woke up, yawning and rubbing her eyes, and Callum quickly turned his attention to her, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You sleep well?" he asked, his voice gentler than before. Eliza nodded sleepily. "Are we staying here all day?" she asked, her voice still thick with sleep. "We'll see," Callum replied. "The storm's over, but the cold's still out there. It's best we stay close for now." After breakfast, the three of them sat together by the fire. Evelyn couldn't help but notice how much Eliza had warmed to Callum. The little girl who had been so quiet and frightened when they first arrived now looked up to him as if he were family. She was asking him questions about the mountains, about animals, and about everything she could think of. Callum, in turn, answered her with patience and kindness, teaching her how to spot tracks in the snow and what kinds of animals lived in the area. Evelyn watched them, a small smile tugging at her lips. She hadn't realized how much she needed to see Eliza laughing again, needed to see that spark of curiosity in her eyes. It felt like a reminder that life, even in the midst of destruction, still had moments of beauty. Later that afternoon, after the snowstorm had passed and the world outside seemed a little more welcoming, Callum led them outside. The air was cold but fresh, and the sun cast long shadows on the snow. Evelyn took a deep breath, feeling the chill in her lungs but also the sense of freedom it brought. They walked through the snow together, Callum showing them the tracks of animals in the snow, teaching them how to survive in this harsh landscape. As they walked, Evelyn found herself thinking more and more about what had been lost and what still might be found. Maybe there was something they could do. Maybe there was still hope. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she wasn't going to give up. As the day drew to a close, they returned to the cabin. The warmth of the fire greeted them again, and they settled down for the evening. The world outside was still cold, but inside, for the first time in a long while, Evelyn felt like she was part of something bigger. It was just a small beginning, but it was a beginning nonetheless. "I'm glad you're here," Callum said quietly, his voice rough but sincere. "Both of you." Evelyn looked at him, and for the first time since the storm had passed, she saw something more in his eyes, something hopeful, something that made her believe that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild this broken world together, and that in the end was enough.